All right, diving in today. You guys gave us a pretty hefty one this time, but that's what we do here on the deep dive, right? We sift through it all and surface those key insights you need.
Absolutely. And today we're tackling a true classic in the world of personal development. Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Oh yeah, this one's a biggie. I mean, over 40 million copies sold since it first came out back in 1989. That kind of staying power tells you there's got to be something pretty substantial in there.
More than just a few good tips, for sure. What sets the 7 Habits apart is this focus on a principle-centered approach to, well, pretty much every aspect of life.
So not just quick fixes or hacks, but really getting down to the bedrock of what makes someone truly effective in the long run.
Exactly. It's about building from the ground up, and Covey starts by drawing this really interesting distinction between what he calls the character ethic and the personality ethic.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for me. What's the difference?
So the character ethic is all about those fundamental principles: integrity, humility, things like fairness, courage, justice. The real core stuff.
The kind of qualities that don't really go out of style.
Right, timeless. Whereas the personality ethic is more focused on outward techniques, kind of like how to appear more confident or how to influence people through certain behaviors. It's more about image and outward projection.
Ah, so it's that classic idea of substance over style. And Covey's definitely putting his weight behind that character ethic, right?
Oh, absolutely. He's saying that's the foundation for lasting effectiveness. It's not about tricks or shortcuts. It's about building yourself up from the inside out. And that leads us to another key distinction that Covey makes: the difference between principles and values.
Okay, so we've got principles versus values. Tell me more about that.
Principles are those kind of external, almost like natural laws of the universe. They're constant. They're universal things like honesty, fairness, service, integrity. Values, on the other hand, are more internal and subjective. They're what we as individuals hold to be important in our lives.
I see. So principles are those kind of unchangeable truths out there in the world, and our values are how we choose to live by them.
That's a great way to put it. And Covey's argument is that for real, lasting effectiveness, you've got to make sure your values are aligned with those timeless principles.
Kind of like making sure your internal compass is calibrated to true north. Makes sense.
Right. It's about grounding yourself in something bigger than just your own personal preferences. Now, to help understand how these habits actually play out in the journey of personal development, Covey introduces what he calls the maturity continuum. It's like a roadmap for growth, and it has 3 main stages.
A roadmap, that's helpful. Let's hear about those stages.
Sure. So we start with dependence, which is where we rely heavily on others to get our needs met. Think about a baby. They're totally dependent. Then we move into independence, where we become more self-reliant, capable of taking care of ourselves.
We can make our own decisions, set our own goals. We're not relying on others to do it for us. Got it.
Exactly. But the ultimate goal, according to Covey, is to reach the stage of interdependence. And that's where the real magic happens. It's about recognizing that we can achieve far more by working together, by leveraging each other's strengths, and creating something bigger than what any of us could do alone.
I like that. Interdependence, not just going it alone, but recognizing the power of collaboration and synergy.
Exactly. And the 7 habits are designed to guide us through this whole continuum, starting with what Covey calls the private victory, those first 3 habits that really focus on developing independence within ourselves.
Okay, so those private victory habits are all about mastering ourselves first before moving on to more collaborative stuff. Sounds like a solid foundation. Let's dig into those, starting with habit 1, be proactive. What's the core message here?
Well, proactivity, at its essence, it's really about taking ownership. It's understanding that we have the power to choose our responses to whatever life throws at us.
Instead of just reacting, feeling like we're at the mercy of our circumstances or emotions?
Right. Proactive people, they recognize that there is always a gap between the stimulus, what happens, and their response. And in that gap, they have the freedom to choose.
So it's not, oh, this happened to me and now I feel this way, so I have to do this. It's more like, okay, this happened. Now how do I choose to respond to this?
Exactly. And to really illustrate this, Covey uses this really helpful visual, the circle of concern and the circle of influence.
Okay, I've heard of those. Remind me, how do they work?
The circle of concern is basically everything that we might worry about or care about in our lives. It's a big circle, right? Could be stuff at work, things going on in the world, relationships, health, you name it.
Yeah, that can get pretty overwhelming pretty quickly.
It can. But within that circle of concern, there's a smaller circle, the circle of influence. And that represents all the things that we can actually do something about.
Where we have some agency, some control.
Precisely.
Uh-huh.
And the proactive approach is to focus our energy and attention on that circle of influence. It's about recognizing, okay, I can't control everything that happens out there, but I can control how I choose to respond,
Yeah.
and I can control my actions within this sphere.
So it's about working on expanding that circle of influence and not getting bogged down by all the stuff in the circle of concern that we can't directly change.
Exactly. And you can actually see this shift in the way proactive people use language. Instead of I can't, it's I will. Instead of if only, it's I choose. Instead of blaming external circumstances, they take responsibility for their actions and reactions.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a subtle shift in mindset, but it can have huge consequences.
And it all goes back to that fundamental principle. Between stimulus and response, there's a space for choice. Recognizing that space and consciously choosing your response based on your values, that's where real power lies.
I love that. It's so empowering, really. Okay, let's move on to habit 2. Begin with the end in mind. This one feels particularly relevant for anyone trying to create a meaningful life race.
It really is. It's about having a clear vision for your life, knowing where you're going, and making sure your actions are aligned with that ultimate destination.
And Covey's big suggestion here is to create a personal mission statement. It sounds daunting, but it's about defining those core values and that overarching purpose you were talking about earlier.
Precisely. It's like writing your own personal constitution. It's a document that articulates your deepest beliefs, what you stand for, what kind of impact you want to have on the world.
And this might sound kind of morbid, but to help people with this, Covey suggests this exercise of imagining your own funeral.
Yeah, it's a powerful one for sure. The idea is to think about what you would genuinely want people to say about you, the legacy you leave behind. What kind of person were you? What difference did you make in their lives?
Wow, that really forces you to confront what truly matters, doesn't it? To cut through all the superficial stuff and really focus on what gives your life meaning.
It does. And then you use that vision to guide your decisions in the present. So you're not just reacting to what comes your way, you're actively shaping your life in alignment with that ultimate end goal.
Okay, so the key principle at play here is that everything gets created twice. First in your mind, then in the real world. If you don't consciously design your life based on your values, you risk living by default.
Exactly. You're not in the driver's seat, you're just along for the ride. Now, on to habit 3, put first things first. This is where we get down to the nitty-gritty of managing our time and priorities effectively.
But it's not just about cramming more tasks into our already packed schedules, right?
No, it's not about doing more. It's about doing the right things. And for that, Covey gives us this super helpful tool, the time management matrix.
Ah, yes, the famous 4 quadrants. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with this one. But let's refresh our memories.
Absolutely. So in the matrix, we have quadrant 4, which is both urgent and important. Think of these as the crises, the pressing deadlines, the things that demand our immediate attention.
The things that tend to scream the loudest and stress us out the most.
Exactly. Then there's quadrant 3, which is urgent but not important. These are often interruptions, distractions, things that feel pressing in the moment but don't actually contribute much to our long-term goals.
Like that meeting that could have been an email.
Right. Then we have quadrant 4, which is neither urgent nor important. Think of these as the true time wasters, mindless scrolling, binge-watching shows. We don't even really enjoy things that just drain our energy and don't move us forward.
Yeah, we all have our guilty pleasures that fall into that category.
Of course. But the real key to effectiveness, according to Covey, is spending more time in quadrant 2. Not urgent, but important. These are the activities that are crucial for long-term success and well-being, but don't have those screaming deadlines attached to them.
So things like planning, building relationships, personal development, taking care of our health, those things that we often neglect because they don't feel urgent in the moment.
Precisely. And the challenge is that because they're not urgent, we tend to put them off, and then we end up scrambling to deal with all the quadrant crises that could have been prevented if we just invested more time in quadrant 2.
So the real takeaway here is to be proactive with our time, just like we're proactive with our lives.
Exactly. It's about consciously choosing to invest our time in those activities that align with our values and our long-term goals, even though they don't always feel the most pressing in the moment.
Makes sense. So we've tackled those private victory habits, being proactive, beginning with the end in mind, and prioritizing effectively. Now we move into the public victory habits, which, as you mentioned earlier, are all about moving from independence to interdependence.
That's right. These next three habits focus on how we interact with others, how we build strong, collaborative relationships. And it all starts with habit 4, think win-win.
Okay, so win-win, everyone's happy, right? Sounds pretty straightforward.
Well, it sounds simple, but Covey's really challenging us to adopt a whole new paradigm for how we approach interactions. He outlines 6 different approaches to human interaction, and win-win is just one of them.
6. Okay, lay them on me.
So besides win-win, we have win-lose, which is basically the I get what I want, even if it means you lose out mentality.
Pretty competitive, very zero-sum game.
Exactly. Then there's lose-win, which is the opposite I give in. You get what you want, even if it means sacrificing my own needs. Then we have lose-lose, nobody wins. Everyone walks away unhappy or even worse off than before. Right? That's a destructive spiral. Then there's simply win, where the focus is solely on your own needs, regardless of the impact on others. And finally, we have win-win or no deal.
Win-win or no deal, that's an interesting one. What does that mean?
It basically means that if you can't find a solution that benefits both parties, that's truly mutually beneficial, then it's better to walk away from the deal altogether.
So it sets a pretty high bar for collaboration. No settling for half measures or forcing someone to compromise in a way that doesn't feel good.
Exactly. But the real heart of habit 4 is about genuinely striving for that win-win outcome in the first place. And that comes from cultivating what Covey calls an abundance mentality.
Okay, abundance mentality versus the scarcity mentality. Can you unpack that for us?
Sure. The scarcity mentality is that belief that there's just not enough to go around. It's that pie is only so big, and if you get a bigger slice, it means there's less for me.
It's a very competitive mindset.
It is. It leads to this constant struggle to get ahead, even if it means stepping on others along the way. Whereas the abundance mentality is the belief that there are enough resources, opportunities, and success to go around for everyone.
So it's not about either you win or I win. It's about we can both win together.
Precisely. And that mindset completely shifts how you approach interactions. Instead of seeing others as competitors, you start seeing them as potential collaborators.
That's a huge difference. And what about those character traits we were talking about earlier? How do those play into fostering a win-win approach?
Covey emphasizes the importance of integrity, maturity, and that abundance mentality we were just discussing. Integrity is all about sticking to your principles, doing what's right, even when it's difficult.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. Maturity, in this context, is about finding that balance between courage and consideration. It's having the courage to express your own needs and desires while also being considerate of the needs and perspectives of others.
So it's not about being a pushover, but it's also not about being a bully. It's about finding that sweet spot in the middle.
Right. And of course, the abundance mentality underpins it all, believing that there's enough success to go around for everyone. When you combine those qualities, the possibility of achieving win-win outcomes increases significantly.
Makes sense. All right, moving on to habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. This one's all about becoming a better listener, right? But it's a very specific kind of listening.
Absolutely. This habit is all about empathic listening. And that means listening with the intent to truly understand the other person, not just to formulate your response or to wait for your turn to talk.
Covey actually outlines 5 different levels of listening to really drive home this point, right?
He does. And it's a really helpful framework. So the first level is ignoring, not listening at all.
Pretty self-explanatory.
Then there's pretending, nodding your head saying, but you're not really paying attention.
We've all been there. Guilty as charged.
Then there's selective listening. We only hear the parts that interest us or confirm our existing beliefs, and we tune out the rest.
Filtering everything through our own biases.
Exactly. Then we have attentive listening. We're actually paying attention to the words being spoken. We're trying to understand the content.
That's a step in the right direction.
It is. But the highest level, the one that really unlocks effective communication, is empathic listening. And that's where the magic happens.
So what makes empathic listening so different, so powerful?
Empathic listening is about putting yourself in the other person's shoes. It's about trying to see the world from their perspective, to understand their feelings and their needs, even if you don't necessarily agree with them.
It's about really connecting with them on a deeper level.
Exactly. And when you do that, when you genuinely try to understand before you try to be understood, you build trust, you create a foundation for real dialogue.
And then the other person is much more likely to be open to hearing your perspective as well.
Right. It's about building that bridge of understanding before you try to get your point across.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, now on to habit 6. Synergize. This is where the power of teamwork really comes into play.
It does. Synergy, it's that concept that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's about recognizing that when people with different perspectives, different strengths come together and genuinely collaborate, they can create something truly remarkable.
It's like 1 + 1 = 3, or maybe even more.
Exactly. It's not just about compromising, about meeting in the middle. It's about finding that third alternative, that solution that's even better than what any one person could have come up with on their own.
So how do we actually create that synergy? What does that look like in practice?
It starts with valuing differences. It's about recognizing that everyone brings something unique to the table. And instead of seeing those differences as obstacles, we see them as opportunities.
Okay, so instead of trying to force everyone into the same mold, we embrace the diversity of thought, the different approaches, the different experiences.
Exactly. And when you create that kind of environment where everyone feels safe to share their ideas, to challenge assumptions, to think outside the box, that's where the real magic happens.
That's when those innovative, those breakthrough ideas start to emerge. Love it.
Yeah.
All right, and finally, we arrive at habit 7, sharpen the saw. This one's all about self-renewal, right?
It is. And Covey uses this great metaphor of a lumberjack who's trying to cut down a tree with a dull saw.
I can already feel my arms getting tired just thinking about it.
Right, it's going to take forever, and it's going to be incredibly frustrating. But if the lumberjack just takes a few minutes to sharpen the saw, the whole process becomes so much easier and more efficient.
So the idea is that we are the saw, and we need to regularly sharpen ourselves in order to be effective in all areas of our lives.
Precisely. And Covey breaks down this self-renewal into 4 key dimensions: physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual.
Okay, let's break those down. Starting with the physical, that one's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, it's all about taking care of our bodies, getting enough sleep, eating nutritious foods, exercising regularly, managing stress effectively.
All the stuff we know we should be doing, but sometimes let slide.
It happens. But the point is that when we neglect our physical health, it impacts every other area of our lives.
Absolutely. We have less energy, less focus, less resilience. Okay, what about the mental dimension?
This one's all about keeping our minds sharp and engaged. It could be reading, learning new things, engaging in challenging conversations, writing, anything that keeps our brains active and growing.
So not just passively consuming information, but really actively using our minds.
Exactly. And then we have the social-emotional dimension, which focuses on our relationships with others.
Okay, so this is about nurturing those connections, building strong bonds, being empathetic and supportive.
Right. It's about recognizing that we're not meant to go through life alone, that we thrive in community with others.
And then finally, we have the spiritual dimension. This one can feel a little more ambiguous, but I know it's really important to Covey.
It is. And doesn't necessarily have to be about religion, although it can be for some people. It's really about connecting with our core values, our sense of purpose, that deeper meaning in life.
It could be spending time in nature, meditating, practicing gratitude, engaging in creative pursuits, anything that nourishes our souls.
Exactly. And the key takeaway here is that all 4 of these dimensions are interconnected. When we neglect one, it impacts the others. But when we invest in all 4, we create this upward spiral of growth and effectiveness.
It's like those old-fashioned water pumps. You have to prime them first, put in the effort, but then the water starts flowing freely.
I love that analogy. And it really highlights that habit 7 is the foundation that makes all the other habits possible. When you're taking care of yourself, renewing yourself regularly, you have the energy, the clarity, the emotional resilience to actually implement those other habits effectively.
So it's not just a nice bonus, it's essential for long-term effectiveness.
Absolutely.
Wow, this has been such a rich conversation. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, but even so, there are so many valuable insights here. I'm thinking about our listeners. What are some of the key takeaways they can really walk away with from this deep dive into the 7 habits?
That's a great question. So first and foremost, I'd say, remember that true effectiveness is rooted in character. It's not about quick fixes or superficial techniques. It's about those fundamental principles we talked about: integrity, fairness, humility, courage.
It's about being the kind of person who naturally embodies those qualities, and that's what leads to lasting success.
Exactly. Second, real change starts from the inside out. It's about examining our own paradigms, those deeply held beliefs that shape how we see the world, and making sure they're aligned with those principles.
So it's not about just changing our behaviors, but about transforming our thinking at a fundamental level.
Right. Third, remember that you have the power to choose your response. Between every stimulus and response, there's a gap, and in that gap lies our freedom to choose how we react, how we act.
And that's incredibly empowering once you really internalize it.
Absolutely. Fourth, having a clear sense of purpose is essential. Taking the time to define your mission, to articulate your values, that gives you a roadmap, a guiding star for your life.
So you're not just wandering aimlessly, you know where you're going and why.
Right. Fifth, prioritize ruthlessly. Not everything is equally important. Learn to distinguish between the urgent and the important, and make sure you're investing your time and energy in those quadrant 2 activities that will truly move you forward.
It's about being intentional with our time, with our energy, with our lives.
Exactly. Sixth, remember that interdependence is the highest level of maturity in terms of relationships. It's about recognizing that we can achieve far more together than we ever could alone.
And that requires a shift from that scarcity mentality to an abundance mentality.
Absolutely. Seventh, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Empathic listening is one of the most powerful tools we have for building strong, healthy relationships.
It's about putting aside our own agendas for a moment and really trying to see the world through the other person's eyes.
Exactly. Eighth, embrace differences and seek synergy. Don't shy away from those diverse perspectives. Lean into them and see what amazing things you can create together.
It's about recognizing that the whole can truly be greater than the sum of its parts.
Ninth, never stop sharpening the saw. Invest in yourself across all those dimensions: physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual.
It's an ongoing process, but it's the key to sustainable growth and effectiveness.
And 10th, remember that balance is a dynamic process. It's not about achieving some perfect state and staying there. It's about constantly adjusting, recalibrating, making sure you're attending to all the important areas of your life.
It's about staying aware and making conscious choices.
Exactly.
Well, there you have it, a deep dive into the 7 habits of highly effective people. It's a classic for a reason, and these principles, they're just as relevant today as they were back in 1989.
Absolutely. Stephen Covey, he really gave us a framework for living a more meaningful, more effective, and ultimately more fulfilling life.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Think about which of these 7 habits resonated most strongly with you. Which one felt like it really hit home?
Yeah, maybe there's one that felt particularly challenging or one that you're already pretty good at but could take to the next level.
Exactly. And what's one small, concrete step you could take today to start integrating that habit, that principle into your life?
Even a small change, consistently applied, can make a huge difference over time.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and until next time, keep striving, keep growing, and keep sharpening those saws.
See you next time.